Trust in God beyond circumstances is the heartbeat of a victorious life. So many times we allow our eyes to fix on what we can see, and in doing so, we forget the one who is unseen yet all-powerful. Life has a way of presenting challenges that seem too heavy to bear, situations that make no sense, and doors that appear to be permanently closed. But when we place our trust fully in God, we shift our perspective from the limitations of the world to the limitless possibilities of the divine. Faith begins the moment we decide that our hope is not in what humans can do, not in our own strength, and not in the fleeting patterns of circumstance, but in the steadfast, unchanging nature of God. Trusting Him beyond what we see is not merely an emotional comfort, it is a spiritual posture that opens the door to miracles. When you trust God in the midst of impossible circumstances, you are declaring that your faith is greater than your fear. You are saying that your confidence rests not on your understanding, but on His wisdom. You are choosing to believe that even when the storm rages, there is a hand guiding you through, unseen and yet powerful enough to turn what looks like defeat into victory. Trust does not deny the reality of the problem. It acknowledges it, faces it, and then looks past it to the God who can change it. Many people give up because they only see the storm, but faith allows you to see the calm in the storm, the solution in the struggle, and the purpose in the pain. To trust God beyond circumstances requires patience, persistence, and the courage to stand firm, even when the world says it is impossible. It requires reminding yourself daily that God's ways are higher than your ways, and His thoughts higher than your thoughts. It is the practice of looking at your bills, your health challenges, your broken relationships, and saying, Lord, I may not see how this will turn out, but I know you are able. Trust is strengthened each time you recall God's faithfulness in the past, remembering the times He has delivered, healed, provided, and restored, even when it seemed there was no hope. Furthermore, trusting God beyond circumstances transforms the believer from a passive observer into an active participant in God's plan. It fuels courage, inspires perseverance, and empowers you to take steps you never thought possible because your confidence is anchored not in what you can do, but in who God is. When you trust Him, you no longer measure life by what you can control. You measure it by His promises and His power. Every impossible situation becomes an opportunity to witness His glory. Every closed door, a chance to see His hand at work, and every challenge a stage for His miracle. The greater your trust, the greater the testimony, and the more profound the impact of God's work in and through your life. Surrender leads to breakthroughs because it is in letting go that we make room for God to move. So often we cling to our own understanding, our own plans, and our own strength, believing that if we just try harder or figure it out, we can overcome every obstacle. But there comes a moment in every believer's life when holding on to control actually blocks the very miracle we are praying for. God calls us to surrender, not because He needs control, but because He wants to show us the power that is beyond human effort. Surrender is the acknowledgement that we are limited, but He is limitless. It is the act of placing our burdens, our fears, and our impossible situations into His hands and trusting that He is fully capable of handling them far better than we ever could. When we surrender, we stop trying to fix everything on our own and begin to align ourselves with God's divine timing and perfect plan. The breakthrough often comes not when we push harder, but when we release our grip and say, Lord, I give this to you. I cannot do it, but you can. In that moment, peace floods our spirit because we understand that the outcome is no longer dependent on our efforts, but on His power. Surrender is not weakness. It is the ultimate demonstration of faith. It requires humility, courage, and the willingness to trust God even when the solution is not immediately visible. Many people struggle because they think surrender means passivity, but that is far from the truth. Surrender is an active engagement with God. It means that while you lay down your worries, you still rise in faith, take steps of obedience, and remain expectant. It is the posture of the heart that says, I cannot do this alone, but with you, all things are possible. This act of surrender opens the door for divine intervention because it allows God to work unhindered. When we are consumed by our own efforts and anxious thoughts, His power is blocked and His glory cannot fully manifest. But when we surrender, we are like an open vessel ready to receive His wisdom, guidance, and miraculous provision. Surrender also transforms our perspective. What once felt like a crisis becomes a stepping stone. What once seemed like a failure becomes a lesson in God's faithfulness. Surrender teaches patience, trust, and the ability to see beyond the immediate circumstances to the greater plan God has for our lives. Every time we release control, we create space for breakthroughs that are far beyond what we could have imagined. Mountains begin to move, doors open, and chains break, not because of our power, but because God's power flows freely in our surrendered hearts. The more we practice surrender, the more we recognize that true breakthroughs are not always about changing our circumstances. Often they are about changing us. God uses surrender to cultivate strength, perseverance, and faith in us. And as we surrender, we witness firsthand that He is faithful to fulfill His promises, to provide solutions, and to bring miracles into our lives that we could never orchestrate on our own. Surrender is the key that unlocks the impossible, and every breakthrough begins with the courage to release control and trust the one who is fully capable of delivering what we cannot achieve alone. Impossible is just a word, not a reality when God is involved. So often we allow the limitations of the natural world to define what is possible for our lives. We see obstacles, walls, and setbacks, and we begin to whisper to ourselves, this is impossible. But let me tell you something today. Impossible is only a word that human minds have created. God does not operate by human standards. He does not measure outcomes by what we can see or calculate. What seems impossible to us is already within His power to accomplish. The God who spoke the universe into existence, who parted the seas, and who raised the dead is not constrained by the boundaries that confine us. When we understand this, our perspective changes. We begin to realize that no situation, no problem, no mountain, and no delay can limit the power of God in our lives. When you face circumstances that appear insurmountable, it is not a sign that God has abandoned you. It is a call to faith, a call to rise above what is visible and place your trust in the one who specializes in the impossible. The Word of God is filled with examples of impossible situations turned into testimonies. From barren wombs to locked prison doors, from stormy seas to armies too large to conquer, the impossible became possible because men and women chose to believe in God's ability rather than their own understanding. And today, that same God is able to do the same for you. Your situation may look hopeless, but your hope must remain anchored in Him. Believing God for the impossible requires a mindset shift. It requires you to speak faith over doubt, to act courageously in the midst of fear, and to hold fast to the promises of God, even when the evidence seems contrary. It requires declaring, Lord, I cannot do this, but you can. That declaration is not empty words. It is a spiritual act that aligns your heart with the power of the Almighty. Every time you step into faith, you are positioning yourself to see miracles that defy human logic. You are saying, in essence, that you will not be limited by what you see, but you will be empowered by what God can do. Impossible is also a test of endurance. It tests your patience, your trust, and your willingness to persevere. Many people give up right before the breakthrough because they cannot see the invisible hand of God working on their behalf. But those who continue to believe, continue to pray, and continue to trust discover that God's timing is perfect, His plan is unshakable, and His power knows no limits. The impossible becomes the platform for His glory to be displayed in your life. When you start to see impossible as merely an opportunity for God to demonstrate His greatness, everything changes. Mountains move, doors open, chains break, and storms are calmed, not by your effort, not by human ingenuity, but by the unmatched power of God. Remember, impossible is only a word until God turns it into a testimony. It is only a barrier until He moves through it with His divine authority. And when He does, your life becomes a living testimony that inspires, encourages, and gives hope to everyone who witnesses what God can do when you trust Him completely. Faith requires action, and it is in action that the promises of God begin to manifest. Many people think faith is passive. They believe that simply thinking, hoping, or wishing will move mountains. But faith is not a spectator sport. True faith compels you to step forward even when the path is unclear, to speak boldly even when the circumstances seem overwhelming, and to act courageously even when fear threatens to paralyze you. When you take action in faith, you are not relying on your own ability. You are relying on the power of God working through your obedience. Every step you take, no matter how small, becomes an expression of trust in the one who is faithful to fulfill His word. When life presents challenges, it is easy to remain stagnant, waiting for a perfect moment that may never come. But faith calls you to move while trusting that God will provide the way. Abraham did not sit and wait for the promise of God to arrive in its own time. He rose and went where God directed him, even though the destination was uncertain. Moses did not remain silent in fear. He stepped forward to lead a nation, trusting that God would make a way through the Red Sea. Every act of faith is an invitation for God to demonstrate His power, and every step you take in obedience positions you to receive the miraculous. Action in faith is also about speaking life over your circumstances. Words have power, and when you declare the promises of God, you align your spirit with His will, saying, "I trust you, Lord," or "I believe you will do the impossible," is not just a prayer, it is a declaration that moves heaven and opens the door for divine intervention. Faith speaks even when it does not yet see. Faith acts even when the outcome is uncertain, and faith perseveres even when the storm rages. It is in these moments of active belief that the impossible begins to shift, the chains begin to break, and miracles begin to unfold. Taking action in faith requires courage. It requires stepping out of comfort zones, confronting fear, and risking failure, because you understand that God's power is greater than any obstacle. You may not have the full picture, but God does. And your willingness to move in faith allows His plans to unfold in ways you cannot control or predict. The act of faith is a partnership with God. You bring obedience, He brings provision, and together you create results that are beyond imagination. Faith also teaches perseverance. Sometimes the first step is not enough. The second, third, or even the 100th step may be necessary. Every action you take in faith strengthens your trust in God and builds momentum toward breakthrough. Faith in action is a living testimony, demonstrating that what God promises, He also delivers. When you act on your faith, you activate the supernatural, and doors that were once closed begin to open. Opportunities multiply, and the impossible becomes possible. God's timing and plan are perfect, even when it feels like nothing is happening. So many of us struggle because we see delays, setbacks, and closed doors, and we think God is late or that He has forgotten us. But the truth is, God's timing is never late, and His plan is never flawed. Every season of waiting, every period of silence, and every moment of uncertainty is part of a greater design that we cannot always see with our natural eyes. He is orchestrating everything behind the scenes, arranging the pieces, preparing the breakthrough, and lining up blessings in ways that we could never imagine. When we learn to trust His timing, we are freed from frustration and fear, knowing that the right thing is coming at the right moment. Waiting on God does not mean doing nothing. It means trusting, preparing, and positioning yourself for the opportunity that He is about to provide. It means refining your faith, strengthening your character, and learning patience in the process. Often God's delays are not denials, they are preparations. While you wait, He is working behind the scenes, molding your heart, orchestrating events, and aligning circumstances to ensure that when the moment arrives, it is perfect. The breakthrough you are praying for will not be delayed because of human limitations, but it will arrive at the exact moment when it will have maximum impact and glory. Understanding God's plan also requires perspective. Life is full of detours, obstacles, and unexpected changes, and it is easy to interpret these as setbacks. But God's plan is bigger than any challenge we face. What looks like a delay may be protection. What seems like a loss may be a setup for something far greater. Every twist, turn, and interruption is under His control, and He is using it to guide you toward your destiny. Trusting His plan means surrendering the need to know every detail and having confidence that He knows exactly what you need, exactly when you need it. Patience in God's timing builds faith. Every moment of waiting tests our belief, strengthens our perseverance, and prepares us to receive the fullness of His promises. Those who trust God's timing do not panic, do not rush, and do not give up. They walk confidently, believing that everything happening now is working toward a greater good. When you trust His plan, you can rest in the assurance that God is not bound by human schedules or limited by circumstance. His timing is perfect and His plan is flawless. Finally, trusting God's timing allows us to experience joy in the journey, not just in the destination. When we realize that His plan is unfolding even in ways we cannot see, we can walk with peace, gratitude, and hope. The mountains may be high, the challenges may be fierce, but God's plan is unstoppable and His timing is impeccable. Your breakthrough, your miracle, and your answered prayer are already on their way. And every moment you wait faithfully is bringing you closer to the manifestation of His perfect will. Declaration of victory and confidence is a powerful force in the life of a believer. So often, people wait for circumstances to change before they speak words of faith, before they step into boldness, or before they declare that victory is theirs. But true faith does not wait for the proof to appear. It speaks the promise into existence. When you declare, "Lord, I trust you to do the impossible," you are not simply voicing a hope. You are aligning your spirit with the power of God and opening the door for His supernatural intervention. Your words have weight. Your declarations carry authority. And when combined with unwavering trust, they become a powerful magnet for miracles, breakthroughs, and divine favor. Confidence in God is not arrogance. It is rooted in the knowledge of His faithfulness. It comes from remembering every battle He has fought on your behalf, every prayer He has answered, and every promise He has fulfilled in the past. Confidence is born from experience, reflection, and a deep understanding that God does not fail. When you live with this confidence, you walk differently, you speak differently, you act differently. You approach challenges not with fear or hesitation, but with a bold assurance that God's power is greater than any obstacle in your life. Declaring victory also changes your perspective. When you speak victory over your life, over your family, over your finances, and over your dreams, you are no longer focused on what is wrong or lacking. Instead, your focus shifts to what God is capable of doing. You begin to see opportunities instead of obstacles, solutions instead of problems, and hope instead of despair. This shift in mindset is critical because your words reflect your heart heart, and your heart determines the atmosphere around you. When you declare victory, you create an environment where miracles can manifest, where hope can flourish, and where the impossible becomes inevitable. Bold declarations are also an act of faith that inspires those around you. When people witness your confidence in God, they are encouraged to believe as well. Your words of victory can uplift, strengthen, and motivate others who are struggling, showing them that faith is not passive and that miracles are available to everyone who trusts God fully. Every time you speak faith, you participate in building a community of believers who are expectant, empowered, and ready to see God move. Finally, declaring victory aligns you with God's purposes. It is not just about wishful thinking. It is about partnering with the Almighty. When you declare that He is able, that He is faithful, and that nothing is impossible, you place yourself in a position to receive His provision, His guidance, and His blessings. Your declarations become a spiritual declaration of war against doubt, fear, and impossibility. They are the first step towards seeing the miraculous unfold. When you combine confident speech with persistent faith, action, and trust in God's timing, the impossible becomes possible. The mountains move, and your life transforms into a living testimony of God's power, love, and faithfulness.